Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is Merlin Season 3, Episode 11, The Coming of Arthur. Episode in a nutshell is a summary of what happened within this episode, and a note that this episode was a double-length episode. Meaning that there was a part 1 and part 2, and as always on this channel, we put both of them together in the video and in the summary. So this episode begins with Leon unconscious, being healed by druids who are using the Cup of Life in order to heal him. Arthur, who's returned back to Camelot, is then sent to go find the cup once Leon returns and reports the fact that he was healed with it, as Uther from the Purge knows that the Cup of Life in the wrong hands could be devastating for them. So Arthur and Merlin, of course, go to try to find it. Morgana, of course, happens to overhear this conversation because she's still trusted, and she tells Morgause, of course, who then recruits Senrid to help her basically track down the cup by following Merlin and Arthur. However, while they are journeying, they get kidnapped, or rather captured, by Jarl, and he is a slave trader, and they happen to reunite with Gawain, who has been in the hands of this slave trader for some time and is his current champion on the gladiatorial type battles that he has been pitting his merchandise. Basically, he's been pitting his merchandise against each other, and Gawain is the reigning champion. At first, he tries to promote or choose Merlin to fight, but then Arthur, obviously knowing Merlin's not the greatest at fighting, volunteers. Then only after that is it revealed that Gawain was actually the champion. They then fight each other, but manage to use their fight to escape with Merlin. And they then manage to find their way to the Druids. The Druids readily hand them over the cup because, as the lead druid that is unnamed tells Merlin telepathically, he is giving the cup to Emrys. It is now in his hands, and he needs to be careful with it because the future of the kingdom could be impacted by this cup and is now in Emrys's hands. Well, as they're on their way back, Senrid's men naturally attack them, and while Arthur is wounded, Merlin gets distracted, drops the cup. Senrid's men get it, take it away to where Morgause is waiting, and she then makes an immortal army by putting her blood into the cup. As they are sending out a search party for Arthur, Leon ends up encountering some of the scouts for this immortal army, and he manages to barely escape, runs back to Camelot and warns Uther of the incoming immortal army. And we see Camelot preparing for its battle. Arthur, Gawain, and Merlin, as they're coming back, see the bodies of the Camelot scouts. Then they see more Camelot soldiers deceased, and they see a town burning. They then make their way back to Camelot, which also appears to be burning. This, of course, is after Arthur awakens from his injury. Then they enter in Camelot all sneaky-like and make their way to where Elian is hiding in one of the homes in the village. Elian gives them an update on everything that has happened in Camelot since the arrival of the immortal army, the fact that the king has been, imprisoned, and so they decide to sneak in. Gawain and Elian do detour over to the forest. It's really only Arthur and Merlin who then sneak in. They then see that Uther is brought before Morgause, and He basically, while being forced to kneel in front of Morgause, says that she has no claim to the throne. She cannot do this. And that is when Morgana walks in, revealing herself that Morgause does not have a claim to the throne, but she does. She is his daughter, after all, which he didn't know that she knew. Arthur didn't know, and now he's watching through like this little grated window, and this is how he finds out he had a sister. Um, and she then is crowned queen by Geoffrey. We then have a little bit of time passing, and Leon is brought before Morgana and is basically asked to swear loyalty to her, but he declares his loyalty for Arthur. Arthur has already escaped to the woods with Merlin and is down in the dumps about his finding out he had a sister, being betrayed by said sister, having his father imprisoned, facing an immortal army, feeling basically hopeless about the entire situation. We then, inside the castle, have Gwen plotting to free Leon so that he can go and find Arthur. And in the caves outside of the city, Merlin uses the water he got from the Fisher King, and he keeps trying to use magic on it, not really understanding how it works. Then he is startled and he ends up breaking the glass that held the water. However, this ends up being perfect because it pools into a little puddle on the ground, and he is able to speak to Freya again, who tells him that he needs to go to the lake and to retrieve the sword, as a sword forged in Dragon's Breath can kill the immortals, which we had learned when it was forged originally. So he then leaves to go to the lake, and he rides Kilgara to get there. Then he gets in a little boat, goes into the center of the lake, where an arm holding the sword comes out, which we presume is Freya's arm, though we never actually see her face. Leon and Gwen's plot to escape is successful. However, Morgana and Morgause have known about Gwen's betrayal for some time and have planned to monitor it, and as they leave Camelot, Morgause casts a tracking spell on the two of them, which allows them to basically go and attack them in the woods. However, Merlin is able to hold some of them at bay with the sword Excalibur, while Lancelot and Percival, who Merlin had sent for, arrive, and Percival, using his strength, which is meant to be like extreme strength, manages to push a rock fall in to stop the immortal army from chasing them. They then retreat to an ancient castle that was owned by the ancient kings of Camelot, and it is revealed that there is a round table, and all of the knights and Arthur, Merlin, and Gwen sit around the round table while Arthur basically gives an update on what's happening, what they want to do, gives background on the round table, how it allows everyone to sit as equals, asks everybody if they are willing to come and fight with him. And of course, everybody agrees, except Merlin, who says he's not interested, but Arthur tells him he doesn't have a choice. So Merlin eventually does stand up too. The knights are all knighted, so Percival, Lancelot, Gawain, and Elian are knighted. Leon, of course, is already a knight, so there was that. And then, of course, Lancelot knows about Merlin's magic, so he asks Merlin what his plans are, because he knows that they'll be slightly different from Arthur's. And Merlin reveals that in order to defeat the immortal army, they have to remove the blood from the cup of life, and that's what he's going to do. And so Lancelot helps him out, as when they have their strategy meeting the next day, Lancelot volunteers to go get the cup and bring Merlin with him, as Merlin will be his guide through the castle, while Arthur and the other knights go to basically distract and try to free Uther, who is still the king. From there, we basically get a few battle scenes. We have Arthur and company, making their way through the castle, trying to prevent the immortal army, since they can't kill them, try to trap them in various locations that are caged in or able to be locked so that they can't attack them as they make their way to Uther. They do eventually reach Uther's cell, however, Uther is kind of, I wouldn't say fully catatonic, but he is definitely not in his best mind. When they go to try to save him, Merlin and Lancelot, of course, fight their way to where the cup is, and Lancelot basically uses his skill with the sword to put the army in a position where Merlin is then able to come in with the sword and explode them because they are already the living dead due to the cup. Once they've killed all the guards of the cup, Merlin then goes to try to destroy it, and he does manage to spill all of the blood out of the cup, which does destroy the army that Arthur and the others are facing. However, this is when Morgause arrives, and she throws Merlin, and then Gaius steps in and basically throws her. She then tries to attack Gaius, and Merlin, from where he is on the ground, attacks her again, and she falls unconscious. While she is unconscious, Morgana then arrives, and due to the unconscious nature of the injuries Morgause is suffering from, she begins to screech, wail, scream. And as she does so, her eyes grow gold, and the entire place shakes in time with her screeches, and all of the glass breaks, and it's a pretty epic scene. Then, of course, we get the happy ending of, okay, everything is resolved. Uther's not doing great, but he's freed. Arthur's back in Camelot, where he belongs. Morgana and Morgause have disappeared. Merlin and Gaius are having their dinner. And then, because he promised Kilgara when Kilgara gave him a ride to the sword, Merlin then leaves and places the sword in the stone, per the legends, so that Arthur may pull it at a later date. And that is what happened in this episode. Which means it's now time to rank the episode, and as always, we'll be ranking on our mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. So because it was a double episode, there's quite a bit that applies, and it also not only was a double episode, but it was also a very full double episode. And so, to start, we have our multi-episode supporting character development. Senrid does die. Morgause does betray him after she gets the cup. Before they send the immortal army over there, basically anyone who made the pact to become the living dead and an immortal army with the cup answers solely to Morgause, who is the one who cast that spell. Therefore, all of Senrid's men are now Morgause's men. She no longer needs him. Sorry, he is gone. And then we had Freya becoming the Lady of the Lake, and this is revealed. Obviously, in the earlier episode, she did pass away, but her body was laid to rest in the lake, and now it's showing that she has become one with the lake and is the Lady of the Lake who was guarding Excalibur, and then in this episode is the one who gives Excalibur to Merlin. Then we have our multi-season supporting character introduction, which is Percival, who comes alongside Lancelot as his friend when Merlin requested help from Lancelot. Then we have our multi-season supporting character development. Morgana, obviously, is crowned queen. And then all of the knights are knighted. We then have our impactful, memorable moment line, etc. And there were a few. So there was, of course, the sword rising from the lake with the Lady of the Lake. This calls back to the legends, which is amazing. And it did look pretty cool to see it rising up from the lake. I do wish that they had actually like shown the Lady of the Lake, maybe like that she had risen as well and was like standing on the water or something, instead of it just being like an arm that we presume is Freya's holding the sword. But either way, it still looked cool. Obviously, the knighting of all of Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, again, calls back to the legends, which makes it epic. And, you know, Lancelot, who has been wanting to be a knight for so long, finally gets the opportunity based on his own merits and skills, which is great. Ellian is Gwen's brother, so he gets to be a knight. Um, Gawain gets to be a knight, though I don't know if he actually wanted to be one or not, but he is one, and I mean, if he's going to serve anybody, he would probably choose Arthur anyways. Leon, like I said, was already a knight. And then Percival is a newcomer. We don't really know much about him, but if Lancelot likes him, we all like him because Lancelot's just genuinely like a really good person. So I feel like his friends would be really good people too. And I think Arthur felt the same way, hence why Percival also was knighted. And then the like Morgana's magic screeches and the way they made the building rumble and the glass shatter and all of that is one of my favorite scenes in the series, and therefore for me is one of the most memorable and impactful scenes because it always sticks with me. When I'm looking back on the series, probably at least 8 times out of 10, that's the scene I'm imagining or remembering or adapting to some sort of daydream because I think it was an epic scene. So that one was very good. And then, of course, we have Merlin embedding the sword Excalibur into the stone, which my dad's favorite Disney movie was always Sword in the Stone. So I watched that a few times when I was a kid. It harkens back to memories and nostalgia, and therefore very much memorable and impactful scene. So that was 4 whole scenes that were memorable and impactful in this double episode. Then, last but not least, for the positives, we have the world building, and that, of course, is that in the past, we have seen the Cup of Life before with Nimue, and we learned that it can bring back the dead, but it takes a life in exchange, so while it can give life, it can also take it. This episode, its lore is expanded on, and we learn that if a sorcerer or sorceress puts their blood into the cup and makes a pact with fighters, those fighters will be immortal. However, they are considered to be the living dead after that point, which is why when the cup is emptied of that blood and therefore breaks that pact, they then are destroyed, as they are no longer considered as living. And then we, of course, got the premiere of the Round Table, which again is iconic from the Legends, Knights of the Round Table, with Arthur. And again, hit on all the nostalgia and those legendary moments. So basically, that was a lot of positives. So many positives, in fact, that even though there were a few negatives, they just can't outweigh them. So, spoiler alert, but this is a 10 out of 10 episode. I will still go over the negatives though, of course, but negative first, first negative is character regression. And this was Uther's emotional devastation at Morgana's betrayal. Like I said, he's not entirely catatonic, but he's pretty apathetic and unresponsive to Arthur when he tries to save him, and Arthur has to kind of support him because he's just like devastated and not really having much motivation to do much of anything. So that is a pretty big regression of that character. That was only -1 though. And then we do have a few negatives at -2 points each, but again, nowhere near enough to actually alter the score from a 10. So the first one, of course, we have the betrayal of Morgause to Senrid, who had been her ally throughout the entirety of the season, and now he has been betrayed, stabbed, dead, done, blindsided by her. Poor thing. Obviously, Morgana's betrayal of Uther comes to light. Uther finds out about it. Morgana's open about it. And that also is kind of a betrayal to Arthur because she also kept it a secret from him despite the fact that she knew about it. Uther didn't tell Arthur that he had a sibling, which means he was also lying to him, so that's also could be considered a betrayal. Gwen claims that she's friends with Morgana, that she's going to be on Morgana's side, then plots with Leon to break out. Of course, Morgana anticipates that and follows that, but it's still a betrayal all the same. So we had a lot of betrayal in this episode. Treason, naturally, is the fact that Morgana overthrew Uther, and while she does have a claim to the throne, she does not have the strongest claim to the throne, as Arthur is declared crown prince, He is a prince, and at that time period that mattered. And obviously, those two, well, okay, there wasn't a third thing. I thought there was for a second, but no. It basically is Arthur is crowned as the crown prince, meaning that he is next in line to the throne by the will of the king, and then also the fact that he's a boy would put him in line for succession before Morgana, who is a girl, even though I believe she is older than him, and therefore, if it was based on age, might have a stronger claim. She's not declared as the crown princess, she's just considered a ward to this point, and she's also a girl, which, in the absence of a male heir, would probably allow her the stronger, like a strong claim, but because there is a male heir, it's not the strongest claim, so I'd still consider it treason for that reason. And then, of course, we have when Morgana is trying to get the knights to bow to her will and to declare their loyalty to her, she has them all lined up while the immortals have like their crossbows, and she basically tells them like to follow her. They of course say long live the king, declaring for Uther and Arthur. And she, instead of shooting then at the knights who are defying her, decide to start shooting at the citizens she wants to rule, who are weaponless, who are innocent, who are weaker, in order to try to manipulate the knights who are stronger and defying her into following her to try to protect them. Manipulation tactic, and a really cruel one. Therefore, obviously, that would be a negative messaging and behavior as well. But all of that to say, again, the negatives don't outweigh the positives in this case. 10 out of 10 episode. Now, this was the last episode of this season, which means that we now have our definitive season 3 ranking list. And in first, we have The Tears of Uther Pendragon. Second, The Eye of the Phoenix. Third, The Coming of Arthur. Fourth, Love in the Time of Dragons. Fifth, Goblin's Gold. Sixth, The Crystal Cave. Seventh, The Changeling. Eighth, The Sorcerer's Shadow. Ninth, Queen of Hearts. 10th, The Castle of Furin. And then 11th, we have Gwaine. Continuing on, we have the personal ranking. And I did say most of my thoughts on the mostly objective ranking, so I'm going to keep this one briefer, also to keep the video as brief, well, not as brief as possible, but more brief than it otherwise would be. As I mentioned, this episode has tons of the memorable and iconic moments. It gives you all the nostalgia from back to all of the myths and legends and adaptations that you have seen previously. It's setting up the sword in the stone, which I personally liked. My favorite scene of literally the entirety of the series is Morgana's screech wails and the way that they impact the environment when she sees Morgoth unconscious. I love that scene. I just think it's really awesome and well done. And so that was in this episode, so that's obviously a positive. As always, I pretend the stuff between Gwen and Arthur isn't happening, so I'm not going to comment on that. It did happen, and that kind of put a downer on certain parts. But otherwise, I did think that, okay, here's something I want to say. Lancelot and Gwen have such chemistry. They are so good for each other. I don't understand how they didn't end up together. I know the myths and legends don't allow for it. I mean, it does allow for the cheating and whatnot, but like, honestly, they're just so much better together than Arthur and Gwen are. And like, even when Lancelot arrives, they have that like moment where they like stare soulfully at each other. And it's like, I just don't get why they didn't end up together. That would have been so much better. I mean, we know that it is to do with like the greed and ambition. You choose the person with the higher standing, the higher wealth. That's why it's Arthur, even though the chemistry isn't there, versus the chemistry with Lancelot being there. But, you know, he's just a knight, so can't end up with him. Either way, I didn't like the Arthur-Gwen stuff, but Lancelot and Gwen, this just once again, the connection that they had as soon as they saw each other makes me think it would have been great, given all the other changes they made to the legends, if they had let them be happy together, because I've read some fan fiction that ended up that way, and I just think that they make a great couple, way better than the Merlin Arthur couple. Sorry, not Merlin Arthur, Gwen Arthur couple. You might have noticed that a lot of the times in the fan fiction, when Gwen and Lancelot get together, usually Merlin and Arthur do too. And that's where that little slip of the tongue came from. But I digress. Wasn't fond of that. But because of all the other positive things, and even we got some battle scenes, I really liked this episode. That's why I gave it a 10 out of 10. And that brought our definitive, final, personal ranking list for season 3 to, in first place, The Coming of Arthur, second, Goblin's Gold, third, The Eye of the Phoenix, fourth, The Changeling, third, oh my god, I so screwed that up. Ignore everything I just said about the list. I don't know where my head was. We're going to start again. The personal ranking, definitively for season 3 so far. In first, The Coming of Arthur. Second, Goblin's Gold. Third, The Eye of the Phoenix. Fourth, The Changeling. Fifth, The Tears of Uther Pendragon. Sixth, The Crystal Cave. Seventh, Love in the Time of Dragons. Eighth, The Sorcerer's Shadow. Ninth, Queen of Hearts. 10th, Gawain, and 11th was the Castle of Fiorin. And that now brings us to the series rankings so far, and once again, because this was the final episode of Season 3, we now have our definitive ranking for Season 3 as compared to each of the other seasons so far. So we'll start again with the mostly objective ranking. Season 2 still holds on to first place with a score of 70.83%. And season 3 comes in second, and this is why we do up to 2 decimal points, because season 3 did come in close at 70%, with a final score of 77 out of 110. And then season 1 is in last place currently with 69.23%. On the personal ranking side, however, season 3 is currently in first place, and by almost 3 points. Final score for it was 80 out of 110, and that brought us to 72.73%. Meanwhile, season 2 was in second place with 70.83%, and then season 1 is currently in last place at 66.92%. With that, we have now rewatched and ranked Merlin Season 3, Episode 11, The Coming of Arthur. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.